You're watching the Law and Justice Podcast, featuring one of Virginia's top criminal defense and personal injury attorneys, Alexander L. Taylor Jr., and former corrections treatment specialist turned motivational speaker and author, Eddie Goode. The Law and Justice Podcast is brought to you uncensored by Alex Taylor Law, your soldier in a suit. And without further delay, the Law and Justice Podcast starts now.
Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm attorney Alex Taylor.
And I'm Ed Goode. Thanks for having me.
Today's topic is what happens when you are introduced to the criminal justice system. Now, we're going to begin with traffic stops. I think you would agree that is the most common way we get introduced to the criminal justice system.
Absolutely.
And I know you, at some point before becoming a correction officer, you served as a police officer.
Yes, sir.
And so many of us fear getting pulled over because of what we see on TV. And let's assume you got a situation where you've been weaving back and forth, right? You see the person weaving back and forth, and you put your lights on. You pull up behind them. What is a police officer thinking when they're pulling up behind an individual who has just been weaving back and forth? All they have at that point are those facts.
Right. So typically, and it's been a while.
I understand.
I'm in the 90s, so it's a little different now when I served as a police officer in Petersburg. Typically, once you are notified or you observe some activity that's a little shaky, you get behind and you're trailing. So at that point, I'm observing what the person is doing while I'm trailing him. 9 times out of 10, you're going to see him look in his rearview mirror at you. If you look, if you're a police officer, you can see. And then once I hit the lights, I'm looking at what he does immediately, any overt actions, movements with his hands. Is he reaching under the seat? Is he turning anything off? Is he rolling his windows down?
Why is him reaching under the seat important?
He may be looking for moving a weapon or securing his weapon.
Exactly.
Right. And so, and it's just paying attention to his movements. At that time, I'm calling his tags in to make sure the car is legal. Are the tags active? Is it a stolen car? Is it registered? Does he have a license? Things of that nature. If it comes back to the person. And so, that just raises the awareness. And I think, at that time, I know traffic stops, among a few other incidents, are one of the leading deaths for police officers. Right. So we were trained at that time.
Right.
Going into it,
right.
I'm already thinking about the training and the possibilities of being assaulted because I don't have any protection.
Right. So. Right. And you don't know for sure whether he has a gun. So you almost have to assume that that's a possibility that they're armed. So you walking cautiously up to that vehicle.
Absolutely.
Right?
100%.
And I can assure you, being a former senior prosecutor, nothing's changed. Okay? Yeah. We used to train police officers, and I can assure you those facts aren't changed. For example, when you do get up to that car and you're asking for the identification, are you just looking to get the identification when they're talking? What are you observing when you're looking at that individual?
Well, odor,
mm-hmm.
Alcohol, any other substance, marijuana. I'm looking at his eyes, shifty, body language. Is he nervous,
mm-hmm.
anxious?
Mm-hmm.
After just looking through the car the whole time, he's looking for his credentials. I'm checking out everything. So it's a lot that goes on in that process, man. But
right.
I know for me, if I can recall, I just tried to keep the person calm.
Right.
Myself being calm. That's one of the issues today that I see is that some police officers go into a situation to create a situation.
Mm-hmm.
I always, we called it back then community policing. I believe in community policing. I'm not going in a situation looking for an arrest all the time.
Right.
Right? It maybe I can provide some help. It may be a situation where I can do more harm than good by just jumping in. I'm going to arrest the guy. There's not much learning in that process there, as
Right.
opposed to in some cases where you can do just the opposite. So yeah, I think it's a lot that goes on with that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So if you can de-escalate the situation,
Absolutely.
for example, you see two people arguing in a vehicle, you approach the vehicle, you don't want to make the matter worse,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
by pulling out the driver and slamming him up against the hood. Sometimes if there's another person on the inside of the car, they're gonna react to that situation.
Of course, especially at the climate of what it is today. And unfortunately, we have police officers that are not used to certain cultures,
Hmm.
right? I know when I worked, they you can look at it in so many ways. We put people in areas that can relate to the persons in those areas. I think that's important,
I do too.
right? You have to be able to understand who you're dealing with,
Hmm.
how people talk.
Hmm.
You got some guys, they don't have any respect for their own parents. You think they don't have respect for a police officer, especially today. But back then it was a little different, and
Hmm.
so we dealt with things differently. But I just I believe that a lot of situations would be a lot better if we had a better understanding of people. We got to be able to have a love for people as well, as
Right.
opposed to not wanting to create more harm than good.
Right. I totally agree with you. And I highly recommend that we learn from this chapter of our podcast because what we're talking about today can literally save your life.
Yes, sir.
If you engaging in any further movement, if your phone falls and you've just been pulled over by a police officer, leave it on the floor.
Yes, sir.
Because you reach for it suddenly, all the police officer sees is you reaching for something.
Yes, sir.
He doesn't know that it might be a phone. And what he doesn't know could come back to bite you.
100%.
Now, you don't want that situation. Because that police officer wants to go back to his or her family.
Yes.
That's what they're thinking in their mind when they see you do any sudden movements. And then when he does talk to you, less is best.
Yes.
We've talked about that. You don't have to volunteer information as to where you've been.
That's right.
Now, you do have to give him the ID card. And in Virginia, in most states, if he asks you to get out the car, you have to get out the car.
Yes, you do.
People don't know that. You have to get out the car in Virginia if the police officer asks you to get out the car. And that's for the police officer's what?
Safety.
Safety.
Yes, sir.
That's for the police officer's safety. Now, and he's going to check your breath, your rate of speech. He's going to be checking your eyes, just like you talked about, whether the eyes are blurry or not. He's checking all these things when he's having that conversation with you. So the less conversation, the best. Don't volunteer any unnecessary information about what you have been doing, to include how many drinks you've had.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many police reports I've read, how many clients I've talked to that have told the police officer exactly how many drinks they had.
Yeah. Scared.
Really?
Afraid.
Really?
Yeah, afraid.
That's not a situation where you have to volunteer information
Right.
on yourself.
That's right.
So let's talk about another situation. Let's say you receive a warrant. It's posted in your door. It says turn yourself in as soon as possible. Okay. Do you then turn yourself in, or are there some other things you might want to do before you turn yourself in?
Well, you need some representation.
Exactly.
That's the first thing you need to be calling your attorney.
You call
or
your attorney.
someone who knows an attorney that can help you. And they're easy to find, as you know.
Right.
They're easy to find.
Right.
Yes, sir.
That's invaluable. You call an attorney.
Yeah.
Don't go rush to the police station. Now, here's some invaluable advice. What you do, you call the attorney, you actually hire the attorney.
Yeah.
So you can take with you a letter from your attorney. The letter might be written to the district court clerk, but the magistrate may very well look at that letter and see that you're represented by an attorney. Now, what are your chances of getting a bond? Do they increase or decrease if the person runs to the magistrate with a letter from the attorney indicating that he's being represented?
It decreases. You're more likely to get a bond than not with representation. But
Yes.
it's funny you say that because You know, it can work both ways. A lot of people, well, I need to turn myself. I don't have anything going on. I don't know what's happening. I don't have any charges, but you don't know what's waiting for you when you get down to the police station. You don't know what's going on. You run down there. You may be, if it's a Friday, you're not going to be seen again until Monday. You don't know the situation. You don't know who you've been around, where you've been, who has connected you, whatever, who said anything. So it's always best to have someone represent you. Never walk into a situation like that on your own.
Whether you're innocent or not,
Yes, sir.
call an attorney
Absolutely.
so you can get the advice you need, get the legal representation you need, increase your chances of going home rather than being locked up for the whole weekend on, for example, domestic violence charge.
Right.
That can happen.
Absolutely. And
It's happened.
Yes, I'm sorry. Most good attorneys like yourself, you know the magistrates, you know the judges, you know the common attorneys,
Exactly.
and you know I don't know anybody. They're not gonna listen to me. They'll listen to you.
Right.
You know, so that helps. Absolutely helps.
It does. Invaluable information. Now, and before, of course, talking to the police, you want to consult with an attorney for another reason. True or false? A police officer has to tell you the truth when they're conducting their investigation.
That's
False.
That's false.
False. A police officer does not have to tell you the truth. They are conducting an investigation, and they can lie to you pursuant to that investigation.
Yes.
And you're thinking you're going down there innocent. He tells you, we just want to ask you a few questions. Little do you know, those questions can get you jammed up. And if you lie or make a misstatement about a fact and they believe you're lying, that's even more likely for you to receive a fair shake on the issue of bond. They may charge you with something that maybe you're innocent with.
Right.
All because they believe you're not telling the truth, simply because of a misstatement versus an intentional lie.
And that's their job. That's their job to trip you up. That's their job to get you to, you know, because a lot, you know, generally people start talking, they want to tell everything. They just start talking, volunteering information.
Right.
And you end up running yourself on a snag, you know. And I know in federal system, it's the old saying they always use, and I'm sure you've heard it before, is that, you know the consequence of lying to a federal officer, right? And they tell you, you know, you're looking at 10 years.
Right.
And then that's it. And you down there by yourself, no representation, you're afraid, you know, and it just goes downhill from there. So that's a great point. Great point.
Call an attorney, retain an attorney. It may cost to retain an attorney, but can you put a value on your freedom?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely
not. Now, let's talk about being arrested at the scene of an incident. All right, we talked about being pulled in a car. We've talked about having a warrant posted on your house. Let's talk about being arrested at the scene of an incident. Let's say there's been a recent robbery, okay? And you just happen to be walking near that facility. Does anything change as far as what you say, how you act with regards to the police officer that approaches you to make that arrest?
Well, I mean, again, you got to reach out for help. You know, I encourage people, you don't give any statement. You don't provide any information because it could be held against you.
Right.
You know, I don't care if you're walking by or you're part of the situation. At that moment, if you're being detained for questioning,
right,
I'm not answering any questions. I'm gonna call you.
Right. That's right.
Call you my attorney.
I've been advised by my attorney not to make any statements.
Yes.
And I don't plan on making any statements until I've had an opportunity to speak with my attorney.
Yeah. I think the one other piece that runs people in the snag is that we get emotional. You know, we get angry, and it turns from being detained for questioning to you assaulting or resisting arrest.
Oh, God.
It goes from 0 to 10. You know, I tell people all the time, you got to think, right? And sometimes it's doing nothing but being still, and let the storm settle. And but you know, oftentimes guys are in so much other stuff that you know they just feel like I got to flight right now.
Right.
And that makes the situation worse. So,
right.
And all that comes up is played against you again in court.
Right.
Yes, sir.
And we're not saying that the officers are always out to get you.
Right.
What we're saying is helping you is not their job.
No.
By the time the officer has come into contact with you, he's got to report that you may have committed a crime.
Yes.
So part of their job is to do an investigation, not to help you.
No.
The person hired to help you would be that attorney.
That's right.
Let's talk about the arrest and what happens after you are arrested. Now, hopefully, you can be safely arrested and not end up an unfortunate statistic, someone that gets killed as a result of being arrested. We've seen that too many times. Um, let's talk about what happens when you're arrested. Not just let's say you get arrested, going back to DUI. You're taken before a magistrate. Okay. Now, what people don't understand is that magistrate is not there to give you a bond hearing. Am I right?
That's right.
He's not there to give you a bond hearing. You're not guaranteed freedom because you've been arrested for a class 1 misdemeanor. You may not. There's a chance you will get your freedom because it's a class 1 misdemeanor like DUI or petty larceny, but that's not guaranteed. Now, when you get escalated up to a felony, then then your chances of a bond exactly start to reduce. Now, let's talk about misdemeanor versus felony. Misdemeanor punishment up to 1 year. Felony, 1 year and more. That's the main difference between misdemeanor and felony. Misdemeanor, however, as well as a felony, can be on your record for a lifetime. There's some changes in the law with regards to misdemeanor. I won't go over all of those. But for the longest period of time, a misdemeanor and a felony stays on your record for a lifetime. Okay? But what you don't want to do is have either charge go before a magistrate and believe that you're guaranteed a bond. Right. Again, contact an attorney first. And then after you go before a magistrate, I'm trying to take the mystery out of the criminal justice system. Yeah. After you go before a magistrate, 9 times out of 10, if he decides that you shouldn't have a bond, you got to wait until you then are brought before a general district court judge. Okay? That's just one step above a magistrate. The general district court judge, hearing cases that day, right around 9 o'clock in the morning, will determine whether or not you get a bond. We talked about, let's say you got possession of cocaine charge, right? And that's it, and no prior record. 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to get a bond, right. Okay? But let's say it's possession with intent to distribute, and you got a weapon in the car when they pulled you over. Yeah, you might be there a while. The general district court judge at that point, you would agree, will probably give you a chance to have a bond hearing, right. Set a bond hearing, and hopefully you have an attorney by then, which goes back to the initial point. If you find out you're being arrested, get that attorney, yes, so that you can make that attorney aware of that bond hearing date as soon as possible. Okay? Knowledge is power. We're trying to take this mystery out of the criminal justice system. You can see how important having an attorney would be. Let's go on to the difference between a court-appointed attorney and a retained attorney. I'm sure you've heard horror stories about court-appointed attorneys. And what a lot of folks, what their perceptions of court-appointed versus retained attorney. What's your observation?
Well, in my experience, it depends on the individual. A lot of my clients I deal with don't have the money to retain an attorney, so they have to work with a court-appointed attorney. And in those cases, to be perfectly honest with you, they pretty much on their own. But depends on the attorney as well. You have some attorneys that are trying to come up. They're trying to really do their job and trying to really win some cases to support you and put you in a better situation. Right. So I think it's give or take. I've seen it on both sides. But, and a lot of it has to do with the individual that's been charged.
Mm-hmm.
and their situation, and
Mm-hmm.
and are they able to articulate some things and represent themselves with the attorney and be honest with the attorney. A lot of times I've seen guys go into the courtroom and the attorney's not aware of things that was been going on because he hasn't even given the information. Like he's hiding from your attorney. He's representing you.
Right.
So it's just a lot. It's a lot.
Right. And I think you and I would agree. Uh, not all court-appointed attorneys are attorneys that don't care
Oh no.
about their client and
No.
are not working on behalf of the client. That's a false perception.
It is.
Okay?
It is.
Because not all retained attorneys are going to be great attorneys.
Right.
Okay? You need to do your research,
Mm-hmm.
and thankfully, that's a lot easier today
It is.
than it was 20 years
Absolutely.
ago. You
Absolutely.
go to Google, you check the ratings
Right.
on these attorneys, whether they're court appointed or whether they're retained. That's how you find out about the attorney. That's one way to find out, and word of mouth.
Yes, sir.
I encourage you, don't make a choice uh, simply based on court appointed versus retained. Make your choice based on research, um, both online and word of mouth, but especially online and from other attorneys.
Yeah. It's good information you're sharing because a lot of guys don't take the time to do research or even know how to research,
That's true.
right? And don't understand the importance of knowing and educating yourself on what you're getting into,
Right.
and who you're ready to help, hire to help save your life.
Exactly.
And that's the unfortunate part about it. So it's good information. It's profound.
It could be a difference between getting justice
Yes.
and not getting
Sure.
justice. That attorney
That's
can
right.
play a key role in that. Last but not least, we'll talk about steps to take when released on bond. Now, I'm telling you this now, and I'm sure you would agree with these points. Um, if you've been arrested, right, and let's say you get a bond, first thing you want to do with your attorney, would you agree, is develop a plan on what to do between the time you get that bond and the time you have to go back to court.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes.
Now, and some of these things don't necessarily change. Like you may want to go ahead and start getting some character letters.
That's right. That's right. Community service.
And community service, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Now, let's say you don't get a bond. You go ahead and call mom, dad, tell them, look, I need you all to start thinking about who's going to write some letters on my behalf because that attorney can use those same letters to help get you a bond. Character letters. And how much does that cost?
It's free.
Exactly. You just got to have an idea, and now you know ahead of time, if you get locked up, no bond, go ahead and make some calls, try to get some characters letters to give that attorney some ammunition on your behalf. Okay?
Absolutely. 100%.
And once you get a bond, in addition to the character letters, like you said, community service.
Whatever your situation is, work on it.
Right.
Work on it.
Especially if it's something like petty larceny. Do some community service, maybe take a shoplifting prevention class.
Some of those things online.
Exactly.
You don't even have to go anywhere.
Exactly. Today it's
right.
online.
Right.
Use your resources.
Yes, sir.
Use your resources. Now, let's say it's a drug charge and you got a bond. Should you go home and watch TV? What are some of the things a person with a drug charge should do if they know they've been caught with drugs, but they got a bond? What are some of the things they may want to consider doing besides watching TV?
Well, make sure to keep the urine clean.
Yes.
Find some classes, some ASAP classes or whatever classes is pertaining to your charge. Get in there, community service, go to a food bank, get some work in it,
Right.
Go back to your church if you belong to a church.
Beautiful.
Get your pastor to write some things for you.
Right.
You got to work, and a lot of guys they give in at that point of arrest. And there's so many things that you can do
to better your
highlight
situation.
Absolutely.
I like what you said about depending on your situation.
Yes.
So if it's drugs, you may want to do it in a drug program.
Yes.
But if it's alcohol, you may want to go in VASAP.
Yep.
And you do these things that can increase your chance
Absolutely.
of getting something called justice.
Yeah. You go to a drug treatment program. You know, you just never know. Hey, I got a problem.
Right.
You know, I mean, whatever. Put yourself in a position to win.
I
Always
love
try
that.
to stand up for yourself.
Right.
Yep.
Put yourself in a position to win.
Yes.
And one way to do that is to get the counseling.
Mhm.
I mean, you're like head of a counseling program.
Yeah.
Describe how beneficial that could be to your clients.
It's awesome, man. We have a program now. We call it drug program, the jails. And so guys with drug charges, and a lot of them, I won't say a lot, some of them do have addictions. Some don't. Even if you don't, that's a program you want to get into because your court date's probably going to be a couple months out,
Right.
depending on your charge, depending on the jurisdiction. Get into a drug program. When you come out, hey, Judge, this is what my client's been doing. He's been in a 30-day treatment program.
Right.
You know, he's been working, you know, all these things. It definitely looks better because we write letters. You know, they graduated from the program. You know, there's reports while you're in the program, progress reports,
Right.
weekly progress reports.
And that's even better than just a character letter.
Absolutely.
Because it's a letter dealing specifically with the problem.
That's right.
That you are coming to the judge with.
Yeah. Yeah. They call it drug court.
Okay.
That's what they call it, drug court. And so in drug court, it is great because they didn't have that back when I was in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
The options, it's long. I mean, it could be up to like a year and a half program.
Right.
But that year and a half, you go to drug treatment, you're out of jail before, you know, it's time, you don't have to do your entire time for the drug treatment. It's a different 60-day program then. You go from there to a sober living home.
Right.
There's different activities that you can get involved in there. You're back and forth to court. You have to provide clean urine.
Right.
So it keeps you in structure, and it
Right.
works for guys that don't want to go back to jail. So it's
Right.
either this, or I'm going to help you pack your stuff up and take you back to jail. And so, guys, nobody wants to stay in jail. We have an opportunity.
Right. And I strongly suspect that your recidivism rate has dramatically been reduced with people who have gone through drug court versus people type of program, structured program.
It works. Definitely works. It works.
So we've armed you all with a lot of information on what to do if you're introduced to the criminal justice system.
Yes, sir.
I'm glad we had your expertise, experiences to share as well as my own. And hopefully you've all learned from this because as I've said before, knowledge is power, and this will certainly increase your chance for success if you ever have to be introduced to this thing called the criminal justice system.
Yes, sir.
Thanks again.
Thank you for watching the Law and Justice Podcast, featuring one of Virginia's top criminal defense and personal injury attorneys, Alexander L. Taylor Jr., and former corrections treatment specialist turned motivational speaker and author, Eddie Goode. The Law and Justice Podcast is brought to you uncensored by Alex Taylor Law, your soldier in a suit, and is recorded at the Creatives Playground in Richmond, Virginia.